Hello gentles and ladymen, I'm Spiro, and I'm not a wizard. So I grew up with the Amiga, but had dabbled in 8-bits that had been owned by my friends. My first computer I ever used was a VIC-20 and then later a C64. The first computer I ever owned was an Amiga, and I grew up with those and never really went back to 8-bits except at my friends' houses. So over the years I've dabbled around in retro computing, mainly aimed towards the Amigas, the Acorn Archimedes machines, and the stuff that I did use when I was younger. But kind of recently I've been on a bit of an 8-bit kick, and Robin over at 8-Bit Show and Tell has kind of unwittingly inspired me to do more with 8-bits and start making these videos, and I thought that it would be kind of cool because they're quite new even for me. I'm been in computing and in IT my whole life, so they're not completely new, but I've always tended to use newer computers. So I thought it would be interesting to set this channel up, kind of cover my misadventures going back in time, learning how to program the 8-bits. It'll be primarily focused on the C64 at the moment, and that is mainly actually because I've found that the C64 seems to have the largest online community building new things, whether it's hardware, whether it's software. I was just been kind of astounded over the last couple of weeks that I've been playing around with them. I don't have any real hardware at the moment. I used to. I was collecting retro machines a few years back, sold them all, had some Commodore 64s, had a Commodore 128, had some Ataris, but life happens, you move on, you think I'll never get the time to get back into it, and you sell them off, and then 5 years, 10 years later you come back and you go, yeah, kind of interests me again. So I'm getting back into that world, and I will be primarily focusing on the C64. I hope that I'll be able to get some real hardware. I have ordered the C64 from online. I'm in New Zealand. I couldn't find anyone locally at the time selling them. Maybe some will show up eventually if I keep an eye on auction sites, but I found one for sale on Amazon, so I bought that, and maybe I have something that looks like real hardware, and it'll be quite interesting. I do want to get actual real hardware, because I'd love to get cartridges and play around with those, which I don't know if you'll even be able to. I don't think you'll be able to do with the 64 because it's basically an emulator, and I don't imagine they've built a cartridge port adapter for it. Anyway, so as I said, this will be my misadventures. I've always wanted to go back and learn assembly language properly on the 6502/6510. I've dabbled in assembly language on various architectures, but not made anything significant. It's always just been dabbling. But this time I kind of want to make a real go of it. The other thing I grew up watching when I was younger were demos, again primarily on the Amiga, because that was the machine I owned, but I loved watching demos. I never had the chops to do any demo coding. I never had the chops to do any graphics or sound, or music. So I was kind of a bystander, and it's something that I've always wanted to do. And what better time than now? I guess the thing I found difficult when I was younger was there was no one else that I knew locally that was interested in demos as much as I was. Maybe they were. It was a very hard thing for me to get into doing in a vacuum, without anyone helping, without anyone to talk to. I definitely couldn't afford the ROM kernel manuals, the Amiga books. They were, if I remember, they were something like about $100 a piece, and that was back in the end of the 80s, early 90s. I might be wrong on the actual cost, but I remember they being so expensive that I wasn't able to buy them. So yeah, I've been dabbling a little bit. I do have Jim Butterfield's machine language book here, and I started going through that, and then after watching some of Robin's videos, I started thinking, it'd be cool to learn a bit more about the fundamentals of creating an adventure game. And my plan is to create one in assembly language, but I found this book here, the Adventure Writer's Handbook for Commodore, which was scanned from someone who maybe called themselves Strider, and I've kind of been going through that. I think I'm about halfway through this book at the moment. If we go through all the blank pages. So I love text adventure games like I love all sorts of games. Have been really big on role-playing games through my life, and computer versions of role-playing games have always been interesting to me, no matter what sort of, whether they're purely text-based, whether they're semi-graphical, whether they're, full-blown, AAA games now on PCs or consoles. Always loved them, but I've always had a fascination and a frustration with purely text adventures. So I thought it would be cool to start with something like this, because then I can learn the fundamentals of creating the game without having to worry at the beginning of learning the graphical side of things and doing that stuff. And so I've been working through this book, and it's quite interesting. It's hard not to read this book with a sort of snobby English accent. The guy is not. It's not an English name. I don't know if that's German or something else, and I'm not sure if the if the language in it is because he was an uber, I mean, I know guys who have been, you know, uber nerds, uber sort of computer science guys who grew up, they went to university, and they all kind of talk like this. It's funny to read. Like, I'm not making fun of the guy, but it's just it's very formal language, and I don't know if that is because that is the way he thinks and speaks, or if because English is not his first language. And it's a fascinating read. I don't think I would have gotten through this book when I was younger, just simply because of the language. It makes some of the sentence structure is interesting. So we go through the basics of creating the game. The map is literally you draw boxes on a piece of paper to figure out how your player moves from room to room, setting up the variables, setting up the objects. So I'll show you an example of I've gotten quite far through this book, so the game is playable and complete to some degree. It's called Gold Fever, written by George, I don't know how to pronounce that, Walkowiak, I'm not sure. So it says Gold Rush here, but the game is called Gold Fever on the main screen. Anyway, gives you a little bit of a background. Some days ago, while looking for a fortune in the New World, you met a critically old, he probably was critically old, he was a critically ill old man, to whom you gave help in his last hours. Out of gratitude, he told you of his gold mine, and the rest of his wealth hidden there. Many dangers faced you on the way there. Soon you will have reached your goal, and it will be seen whether the old man was speaking the truth or talking in a delirium. Do you want advice on what to do next? I'll say no for now. So I'll run you through this. Is for those who are not familiar with ye old text adventures, this is it. You see, the game tells you where you are, what you see, and what your options are. Right? You can often do an inventory. I'm carrying the following with me. I'm carrying nothing because I just started the game. And I can go east. If I try and go north, I can't go that way. If I try and go west, I can't go that way. I can go east. So this is an interesting game. So if the commands that we can use have been shortened in this game, it may not be relevant, but if we go examine rocks, right, several pieces of rock, I can't see anything in particular. So it is just showing us that the rocks are not integral to the game. This game has been written in such a way that, where's my spacebar? It truncates every command you type to 3 characters. So that works as well. Let's go east. So if we show, for example, we examine the hut, it tells us in the corner there's a shelf. The interesting thing about this truncating everything to 3 characters is that everything after that, it doesn't matter what you type. So I can go examination of shelf, and it treats that the same in game as examine shelf or exa shelf. In fact, exa she, because we can't see anything in particular. Wait, what? Did it not truncate shelf? Oh, it's because I've already looked at it. and it's put that in here there's a jar. The game, okay, that's fine. So examine the jar. The jar is full of honey. Okay, so this is the sort of game it is, right? We can take it. Take the jar. Okie dokie. Now if I do an inventory, I'm carrying a dirty jar. So, we've gone through all that here. I've gone through the section of the game where I can load and save. But it has been interesting to say the least. And I'm not sure if this book was written with so many errors. I mean, you can see one here, externat data storage instead of external. Things like that show me that the publishers were lazy or cheap and didn't spend much time or money on editing. And that's been an interesting experience because there's a lot of errors in the game, including, and so what I've done is as I've gone through it, it has been so problematic that I started highlighting this PDF and making notes. So this is just going through the background on how we create the world, how we interact with it and with the player, typing in commands. It's fine. So we find, and this is the map that we were talking about that you draw. So these are the room numbers. You've got descriptions. You've got objects that the character might interact with, or will. Sorry, I should say, or will see. So we do start programming not too far away. This is just giving you ideas, but is not the actual programming that we start with. So we start here entering space descriptions, modified that to include exits, so the game allows you to figure out the directions that you can go. So where you've got I may proceed south and west, that will be determined by the room that I'm. So if I'm in the wood in front of a rocky slope, so it's a mountain slope, so that 6 and that 4 have the room numbers that those directions will take me to. So I think this was north, south, west, east, up, down. Must have changed later on. The game does, the guy does change the where he outputs stuff to. But anyway, so that's how it figures out what the exits are. Alright. So you go through the one thing. Oh, now this is a really interesting thing that I discovered. I started there is a variable in the game called player that he sets up early, and that variable determines the room you're in. As you move, that variable gets updated, and he set up an array called passage. So the passage determines how do I describe it? So that's the player, so that's the current room you're in. Passage. So he's got if passage, bracket, player, direction, right? That's the other one is the direction. So the direction you can go, south, east, west, blah, blah, blah. And so you can see up here he's entered in this line, if passage, bracket, player, comma, dir, and so the variable names are passage, player, dir. But then down here he goes passage, PLA, and I'm like, when I was first started entering this in, I was like, is that a different variable? You know, it didn't twig that something might be off until I got to the next line down here and it said PA. I'm like, did he just get lazy? And it confused me, so I entered in passage in full. I left these as PLA, thinking that PLA would update. That might have been separate to player and that they might have matched up somewhere else in the code. But when I started running the game, there was nothing I had typed in that would allocate or reassign PLA to player or vice versa, but everything just seemed to work. And I was like, what is going on? And so I ended up quitting out of the game, and I would print player. And I was like, great. So that means I was in room 3, and then I would print PLA, and I'd go, great. That shows that it's also in room 3. How was it working? I wasn't sure. And I did a test. I said to myself, player equals 5, right? Print player, we got 5. Print PLA, note, I have not updated that. 5, and I was like, what's going on? What is going on? That messed with my head a lot. So I went online to the Commodore 64 wiki, and I went in here and I typed in variables. I was like, there's something wrong. I don't know what is happening with the variables. And I got down somewhere down here. Where did I find it? See, I didn't plan this ahead. The basic interpreter used only in the first 2 characters for controlling the using variables. So what that means is the basic interpreter uses only the first 2 character for controlling the variables. And I was like, what? Print PL 5. Commodore Basic only uses the first 2 characters of a variable name for the variable name, which means I could do print player 1 is a knobhead. Oh, that's too long. Why is that too long? But it still printed at 5. See? But it came syntax error. Print player is an egg. 5. There you go. So there's a limit. I thought that wiki page said that it could be 80 characters. The length of variable names are optional, but max 80 characters. That is maybe wrong. Yeah, so that was crazy. That it's odd. So yeah, it really severely limits the number of variables you can have in any Commodore basic program. So that was interesting. Now, the first thing I discovered that was an actual bug mistake in the game was that he forgot to enter this "I may proceed." So I added a little text here, so I did it in line 1240, print "I may proceed." And as I was going through the game, mostly it was going cool. And then I got to things, so there's a lot of mistakes in the book. This says AC equals 17, it should be AO equals 17. And that's obvious on the very next line because they all start referring to AO, and then there's a loop which refers to AO. So that's fine. I also found that if you put the end parenthesis after the 2, you got a syntax error, but if you moved it to before the plus, that worked correctly. So I've made a note here, so length of OB dollar bracket I, close the bracket, plus 2. There were things like print CHR5, which probably should have been a character string 5, and that should have been a semicolon. We'll get to more errors later. There's like, it starts off nice and easy, right? A couple of little basic errors, no pun intended. And then this was really amusing. So it was almost like this had been, the book had been typed in by, say, a secretary or something, because they put the full stop outside the quote, as if they were typing in a normal language sentence. Again, I don't know if that is an accident or if that was we got here, so that was another full stop that was outside the quotes. What else have we got down here? Print WS dollar, so that should be MS dollar because there were message strings that get printed, see, like MS dollar 5. So this response had 2 lines, so there was 2 strings to be printed. There's a lot of just I should have bookmarked these to get through them quicker. Okay, so here, this is not all mistakes. This is what they did was once he went through the main program, he said, okay, well now it's kind of working, so here's the full listing, and it'll add things in like the title screen and all that, and it uses these escape. So anyway, in this one I highlighted all the lines. Unfortunately it didn't highlight properly because of the way this PDF has been created. Some of them did. So line 11 added a print character string 142, but the rest of the line was already there. But you know, all of these, there are these escape codes which are listed later, so that you can show that intro screen that I showed when I ran it, which is this here. and so where they added in other things, he changed one of the verbs here from destroy to break. Let's just quit out of that. And so that was cool. That was just made it easier if I ever have to retype it or something, that I know what needs to be added. There were a few other things here, for example, like it took me a while to find that, like when I had finished typing it in, most of the commands you entered in weren't working. And I was like, why is that? I was like, well, because everywhere else he trimmed the commands down to 3 characters, like I showed earlier, but when he is comparing what you're typing in, so EV is the trimmed version of the verb that you're typing in. That's the trim. So that's not the. So that's the 3 character version. So if you had typed in examine, EV string will be EXA, and then it says, does that match verb string VN? So it basically goes through each of the verb, the command. So the verbs are the commands that the game allows you to use. It goes through all of them and it says, does the trimmed version of what you type match the command? But the commands, the verbs, are all listed in the data in full, not trimmed. So I had to add in left string. So compare your trimmed version to left string of the verb, comma WL. WL is the word length, which is defined as 3 earlier in the game. So it's basically saying if the 3 characters that you typed match the first 3 characters of the verb, then you're good. So that bug, I guess. This one here, I changed the clear screen to a rem because when you finish the game, I didn't really want it to clear the screen. I just still wanted it to show you what you had done. I found that in this case, lines like this, there were some, and there were a few examples of this in the game. Later on it happens again. The lines are too long, so Commodore Basic can only have 80 character lines. There seems to be a bit of a leeway, but when you type this in, this is too long by half a dozen characters. And so if you type in a line that's too long, you don't get an error back from Basic saying nah, syntax error or whatever. It just ignores the line. So I think that's the case. There were some that would just ignore the line anyway, that I remember. I don't think it gives you back a syntax error. So I had to change this to shrink it down. So, oops, not print, list 5012. So I had to shrink that. Instead of using that full string of text, I can't see anything from the outside, I changed it to can't see from here, and then that shrunk the line enough. I could have added the spaces back in then, but you had to anyway. Okay, so from good to perfect, this goes into a rant, and then he goes on about the save and load game features. So this is another interesting one here. He put in equals and it should have been not equals. The correct version is in the full listing later, but again it's like there's a lot of oh, this was a funny one, users of the data set. I'm like, what data set? And turns out what they meant was the data set, as in the cassette player, device 1. So again, that was, I think, either because this was typed by a secretary, that was, or English wasn't his first language, and that fell through the cracks. I don't know, again. There's another little, the D1 should have been a DI. Where was I? Oh, I discovered, because when I type in a listing, I would be, I'd always type question mark for print instead of typing out the full word. And it turns out that when you're printing to a device, you can't use the shortened form of print, you can't use the question mark. You've got to type the full word print. Otherwise you get a syntax error. So I've made a note here, manually type print hash, don't use $hash because that will return a syntax error. So I don't know what it is about BASIC, Commodore BASIC, that differentiates the difference between printing to screen and printing to a device. Yeah. So this one here clears the screen, and I just printed game saved instead. Same there, game loaded. So, here's another example. Line 1682 is too long, and I don't know why he's gone print colon print semicolon print. That could have, I shortened that all down to one print command, and where he's got a new line, if you press down arrow you get the inverted Q, and that oh bollocks, see, it goes down an extra line, which he used elsewhere in this, like when he was doing these codes on the main screen. He'd use those down keys to move down lines. So yeah, this one here was he missed a variable li. When you're printing to a file, apparently you've got to make these, like you couldn't go print $2 WE, LM, LW. You've got to make separate print statements, because I was looking up online, and the where was I think it was the last page I was on, print hash. So it actually says, for separating the data blocks, each must end with a return character, which is done automatically if the print for command is not followed by a punctuation symbol. So I think that, and you can see here they went print one bit of data, print the next data. Oh no, they did do a comma there. Interesting. I thought that doing, yeah, okay. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you can just do comma, blah, 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 blah. I thought that you had to print that each one as a manual command, so that it would put a block break in between each. Anyway. It'd be interesting to know how that, maybe I'll play with it and see if I can break it. But yeah. So this is basically where I'm up to now. So I have not this page. I've done up to this page. So there's going to be a few other things here. I think of adding different words. I think so. Maybe for someone that wants to use the word get instead of take, there'll be synonyms start getting added. But it's been interesting. It's been a real interesting experience. it's taken me a couple of days to get to this point, and the full listing kind of looks like this. But I've learned a lot. Like, I've learned not just things about how Commodore Basic works, how to do things like creating data files, writing to them, loading from them within your program, learning some of the quirks of Commodore Basic, like only being able to have 2-character variable names, it's been interesting. So I don't know whether this book has been full of so many errors intentionally. Like, it makes me wonder, right? It's like, did they make a lot of errors in the code blocks, the source code, intentionally, so that people learned more, right? That makes me wonder. I mean, there was a lot of other, like, spelling errors outside of the code, which made me think, in its entirety, maybe it was just laziness on the publisher's part. But it makes me wonder, like, if they hadn't made so many errors, would I have learned as much? The answer in this case is no, I wouldn't have learned as much. But if I was younger, I probably would have gotten frustrated. And it reminds me a lot of old computer magazines where I used to type in stuff, and most of them didn't work, and I didn't know enough, and I didn't have enough presence of mind perhaps to keep pursuing it and to try and figure out. But mind you, a lot of the ones that were in magazines were say assembly programs that were written in BASIC, so you'd literally just be going lines of data 04, 12, 142, 208, and you'd have pages of just numbers. And because it was an assembly program, I didn't have the tools back then to go through and look at assembly monitors and kind of analyze the code. But going back, a couple of years later now, I do have that ability, and I have entered in a couple of programs where it has all been machine code in number form, and I've gone back with a monitor and called a debugger in modern terms, and have gone through the memory and literally written out the commands, and written them in a text file on my main computer on my desktop, and started analyzing the actual assembly code so that I can learn from that. But this has been good because the book is so buggy that to get the game working, I've had to learn a lot more, and to be fair, that's kind of a good thing. So I'm kind of glad I found this book and I started trying to go through it. I'm going to keep working on this, and I'll make some more videos on it, and hopefully you have found this interesting. I don't know how long this has been. How long? Almost 45 minutes. Thank you if you have stuck with me this long. This has been quite an adventure for me, and I'm going to keep at it, going to keep working through this book. As you can see, I'm on page 120 of 244, so I'm halfway through the book. And I think that there is a second game in this book. I'm not sure. It does add more features, and it will expand this out, and then that will give me the ability to understand how to put together my own game, and that is my intent. I don't know if my first attempt will be in BASIC or in assembly. I kind of feel like the restrictions of BASIC are too restrictive, like the number of variables. I don't know. I kind of maybe want to. I started writing a game for the bulletin boards a couple of years ago. Telnet bulletin boards are a thing, and we will talk about that in another episode. I started writing my own bulletin board game written in Pascal to run on Linux, to run on my Linux bulletin board years ago. And that game, I didn't have any understanding of how I should structure the game, and it turned out rubbish, and I might go back to that one day. I still got all that source code, but I kind of wanted to make a game more like Legend of the Red Dragon, which is a different kind of a text adventure to this kind of game. And I think that if I make a game that I'm going to finish, it will probably maybe be a cross between the two. I'm not sure. I don't know how that will work. I like both, and I want to give some thought into how to merge both of those kind of worlds. If you have any thoughts on that, I welcome them. Please leave them in the comments. I'd love to talk to you, more people that are interested in this kind of thing, and that maybe, well, definitely I am interested in talking to people who know more than me, but I'm also interested in talking to people who may have considered this journey or may not have considered this journey, but it sounds interesting. Going back and learning programming and game programming on a system that is much simpler than modern systems, and that don't need as much work to create a complete playable game. I mean, that's the thing I like about the 8 bits, is that I can do all the graphics myself if I do a graphical game, because the sprites are much lower resolution, so I don't need to be an amazing graphic artist. The music, I don't know. I'm sure that whatever I do at the beginning won't include music, but it will, if it's a graphical game, it might just be sounds. That is the beginning of my journey. Let me know what you think, and I will be making more videos. I hope you enjoyed it, and we will talk to you again soon.